People think you remember the big moments clearly. Engagements, proposals, toasts. But the truth is, you remember the small things first. The way the ice clinked too loudly in a glass. The way someone stopped laughing half a second too late. The way a joke landed and didn't bounce back. If you've ever felt a room change without knowing why, you'll understand this. Because the night I got engaged wasn't the night my fiancé asked me to marry him. It was the night his best friend stood up during a toast, and everything I thought I knew cracked open. Let me ask you something. Have you ever realized too late that the joke wasn't the problem? It was the warning. The backyard looked perfect. That's the part everyone always says first, so let me say it too. Warm string lights draped across the fence. A long wooden table covered in linen. Champagne bottles sweating in buckets of ice. The smell of grilled food hanging in the air, mixed with laughter and that strange electricity that comes from people celebrating something they believe in. They believed in us. I believed in us. My name is Lena Carter. I was 29 years old that night. I wore a soft blue dress my sister helped me pick out and a ring that still felt unfamiliar on my left hand. Not heavy yet. Just new. Like a promise you keep touching to make sure it's real. Mark Reynolds stood at the center of it all, of course. He always did. He had that kind of presence. Tall. Easy smile. The kind of guy who made friends fast and enemies slowly. People leaned toward him when he talked. Even strangers felt like they'd known him longer than they actually had. That was one of the things I loved about him. Or thought I loved. The party wasn't extravagant, but it felt full. Full of family. Full of friends. Full of plans. My aunt was already asking about dates. His coworkers were teasing him about finally settling down. Someone put music on too loud. Someone else turned it down again. Normal chaos. Happy chaos. Nothing dramatic. Nothing wrong. At least, that's what I told myself. Because there was one thing I noticed early on, and I ignored it. Evan Brooks. Mark's best friend since college. The man who would have been his best man. The guy everyone described as solid. Dependable. Quietly loyal. Evan wasn't loud like Mark. He didn't command the room. He observed it. He hovered at the edges of conversations, nodding, listening, smiling politely. But that night, Evan wasn't smiling. Not really. I caught him watching us more than once. Not in a romantic way. Not even in a judgmental way. It was something else. Like someone watching a clock tick down. The first time our eyes met, he looked away too quickly. The second time, he lifted his glass like he meant to toast, then set it back down without taking a sip. The third time, I told myself I was imagining things. Because why wouldn't I? I was engaged. Surrounded by love. Standing next to a man who had just promised me forever. Who looks for cracks when the house is still standing? Mark tapped his fork against his glass. That familiar metallic clink cut through the chatter. People quieted. Heads turned. Phones came out. Someone shushed someone else. This was it. The toast. He wrapped an arm around my waist and pulled me closer. I remember the warmth of his hand. The smell of his cologne. The easy confidence in the way he leaned into the moment. He cleared his throat and smiled. I won't make this long, he said, which earned a laugh. He talked about how we met. How I grounded him. How I challenged him. How he never believed in marriage until he met me. All the right words, delivered in that charming, half self-deprecating way he perfected. I smiled. I laughed at the right moments. I squeezed his hand when he squeezed mine. Then he said it. Honesty is everything to me. It was meant to be a joke. I think. Or maybe it was meant to sound sincere but playful. The kind of line people nod along to because it feels universally true. Honesty is everything. People laughed. Some clinked glasses early. But not everyone. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. A chair scraping slightly backward. Someone shifting at the table like they suddenly needed more air. I turned my head just enough to see Evan. His smile was gone. Not fading. Gone. His shoulders were stiff. His jaw clenched. His hands were flat on the table, palms down, like he was bracing himself. And here's the part that still makes my stomach drop when I think about it. He didn't look at Mark. He looked at me. For just a second. Long enough to register. Long enough to feel intentional. Then Mark laughed again, adding something about how I kept him honest and the moment should have passed. It should have dissolved into applause and cheers and photos. But it didn't. The laughter came back wrong. Too loud in some places. Too thin in others. Conversations restarted, but offbeat, like music that had lost its rhythm. I leaned into Mark and whispered, "Everything okay?" He nodded without hesitation. Perfect. And I believed him. Because believing him was easier than asking why Evan hadn't touched his drink all night. Because believing him meant the story stayed simple. Because believing him meant I didn't have to wonder why someone else looked like they were carrying a secret I didn't know about. We moved on. Or tried to. People congratulated us again. Someone asked for another toast later. Someone else suggested games. The night tried to recover its shape. But something had already shifted. You know that feeling when you step into a room and realize you interrupted a conversation? That feeling, but stretched across an entire evening. I caught fragments. Half sentences. People stopping when I approached. A friend of Mark's avoiding eye contact. My sister giving me a look that said, "Do you feel that too?" Still, no one said anything. No one except Evan. I was standing near the table, laughing with my cousin, when I heard the chair scrape again. Louder this time. Intentional. The sound cut through the noise like a blade. I turned. Evan was standing. Not raising his glass. Not smiling. Just standing there, shoulders squared, breathing shallow, like someone about to jump into cold water. Mark noticed a second later. "Hey," he said, still smiling, still joking. "You got something to add, man?" There was a pause. Not the comfortable kind. The kind where everyone suddenly becomes very aware of their own hands. Evan swallowed. I saw it. His throat moved like he was forcing something down. "Actually," he said, his voice lower than I expected, "yeah, I do." My heart skipped, but not in a romantic way. In a way that felt like missing a step in the dark. Mark laughed again. Too fast. All right. Another toast." Evan didn't laugh back. He looked past Mark. At me. And in that moment, before a single word was said, I understood something I wish I hadn't. This wasn't about him. It wasn't about loyalty or jealousy or drama. This was about timing. About truth running out of places to hide. Evan took a breath. And I remember thinking irrationally, desperately, "Please sit down. Please let this be nothing. Please let me laugh about this later." But he didn't sit. And what he said next would fracture the night and everything that came after. Evan didn't raise his glass. That was the first thing that felt wrong. Everyone else still had theirs lifted halfway, hovering awkwardly in the air, unsure whether to finish the motion or set them back down. You could feel the hesitation ripple through the group like a held breath. The kind of pause where no one wants to be the first to move, because moving would mean acknowledging that something had shifted. Have you ever watched a moment break in real time? Not explode. Not shatter. Just bend. Evan stood there, hands empty, shoulders tight, eyes fixed on a spot somewhere between me and the table. He wasn't dramatic about it. No grand gestures. No raised voice. Just stillness. And somehow, that was worse. Mark tried to keep control of the moment. That was always his instinct. Control the room. Smooth the edges. Turn tension into charm. "Come on," Mark said, laughing lightly, nudging my waist again like this was all part of the show. "Don't tell me you're getting sentimental now." A few people chuckled. Nervous chuckles. Polite ones. But Evan didn't smile. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, then finally looked directly at Mark. For the first time all night, his gaze didn't slide away. It didn't soften. It didn't flinch. And that's when I noticed something else. Mark's laugh didn't reach his eyes. It sounds small, I know. Like something people say in hindsight to justify a feeling they couldn't explain at the time. But standing there, inches away from him, I could feel it. The way his grip on my waist tightened just a little too much. The way his posture stiffened, like he was bracing for impact. Evan cleared his throat. "I wasn't planning to say anything tonight," he said. His voice carried. Not because he raised it, but because the yard had gone quiet enough for it to echo. Someone near the grill stopped flipping burgers. A fork clinked against a plate, and then froze. Mark tilted his head, still playing along. All right, sounds serious. Evan nodded once. It is. That word landed heavy. Serious. It didn't belong at an engagement party. It didn't belong under string lights and music and half-empty champagne flutes. And yet, there it was, sitting between us like something that refused to be ignored. I felt my pulse start to climb. My body reacted before my mind caught up. A strange heat crept up my neck. My fingers curled slightly, nails pressing into my palm. This is nothing, I told myself. This is just Evan being awkward. He's always been awkward. But my stomach didn't believe me. Mark laughed again, louder this time. Sharper. Man, if you're about to roast me, at least wait till I'm married. More laughter followed, but it came late. Uneven. A few people glanced at each other instead of Evan. Someone whispered my name softly, like they weren't sure I should hear it. Evan didn't respond to the joke. He took a breath. A long one. The kind you take before doing something you know you can't undo. I just want to say, he stopped, shook his head slightly, then tried again. I just want to say that when you joke about honesty, you should be careful who's listening. The air felt thicker. Like the night itself leaned closer. I turned my head toward Evan, fully now. What do you mean? My voice sounded steadier than I felt. I didn't recognize it. It didn't belong to the version of me that had been laughing 5 minutes earlier. Evan's eyes flicked to me, and something in his expression shifted. Guilt, maybe. Or regret. Or fear that he was about to hurt the wrong person. Mark spoke before he could answer. Okay, Mark said, his tone changing, I think we're good here. He lifted his glass again, higher this time, trying to pull the crowd back with him. To Lena, he said, smiling wide. The love of my life. People hesitated. Then Evan said it. No, we're not good. You could feel the reaction physically. Like a wave hitting a wall. Mark lowered his glass slowly. The smile slipped just enough to reveal irritation beneath it. Not panic yet. Not fear. Just annoyance. Like someone whose joke didn't land the way they expected. Evan, Mark said quietly, through his teeth, sit down. And that's when I knew this wasn't nothing. Because Mark never talked to him like that. Evan straightened. I can't. Why not? Mark asked, still calm, still controlled. Why ruin this? Ruin. The word echoed in my head. Ruin implies intention. Choice. Blame. Evan looked around the table. At Mark's parents. At my sister. At the friends who had laughed just minutes earlier. Then his eyes came back to me. I'm not ruining anything, he said. I'm stopping something. My chest tightened. Stopping what? I felt suddenly very exposed. Like the center of a spotlight I hadn't agreed to stand under. Every part of me wanted to disappear. Or rewind. Or grab Evan's arm and pull him aside, anywhere but here. But I didn't move. Because something in me needed to know. Mark stepped slightly in front of me. Not protectively. Possessively. A subtle shift, but enough to block Evan's line of sight to me. This isn't the time, Mark said. Whatever you think you're doing, it can wait. Evan shook his head. It can't. His voice cracked on the last word. Just a little. But enough to make it real. That's when the crowd really started to fracture. Someone muttered, "What's going on?" Someone else whispered, "Is this a joke?" My sister took a step closer to me without saying a word. I realized then that this wasn't a misunderstanding between two friends. This was a collision. Evan looked like a man who had been carrying something too heavy for too long. Mark looked like a man who thought he could still talk his way out of it. And I felt like the floor beneath me had thinned without warning. "Evan," I said, my voice softer now, "if there's something you need to say, just say it." Mark turned to me sharply. "Lena." I met his eyes. For the first time all night, I didn't smile back. Evan exhaled slowly. "I didn't want you to find out like this," he said. Find out. Those two words hit harder than anything else he could have said. Find out implies something hidden. Something ongoing. Something already real. Mark's jaw tightened. "You don't know what you're talking about." Evan didn't argue. He simply said, I know exactly what I'm talking about. Silence fell again. Heavier this time. Permanent feeling. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. Fast. Loud. Unforgiving. I wanted to ask 1,000 questions at once. What? When? How long? Who? But the only thing that came out was a whisper. What do you know? Evan opened his mouth to answer. And in that instant, before the truth fully stepped into the light, I felt it. That cold, unmistakable certainty. Whatever he said next would make it impossible to laugh about this later. And the moment Evan finally spoke, nothing would ever be simple again. Have you ever noticed how silence can be louder than shouting? Because the moment Evan opened his mouth, the quiet that followed was unbearable. He didn't speak right away. He stood there, lips parted, eyes unfocused for just a second too long, like he was replaying something in his head and deciding whether he could survive saying it out loud. The crowd leaned in without realizing it. Even the people pretending to check their phones had stopped scrolling. Mark broke the silence first. Don't, he said. Not loudly. Not angrily. Just firmly. A warning wrapped in a whisper. Evan ignored him. I've known Mark for 12 years, Evan began, his voice steady but thin, stretched tight over something raw. Long enough to know when he's lying. And long enough to know when he thinks he's getting away with it. A ripple moved through the guests. Not gasps. Not outrage. Just discomfort. The kind that crawls under your skin and settles there. Mark laughed again, but this time it sounded wrong. Forced. Mark's face softened instantly. He shifted toward me, lowering his voice like this was a private moment, even though everyone was listening. Nothing. He's upset about something unrelated. We'll talk later, okay? Later. That word suddenly felt dangerous. Evan took a step forward. There shouldn't be a later, he said. Not for this. For what? Someone near the end of the table asked quietly. Evan swallowed. His eyes flicked to me again, and this time he didn't look away. You deserve to hear this before it goes any further, he said. There it was. That sentence. The one that split the night cleanly in half. Before it goes any further. My stomach dropped. Mark stepped closer to Evan now, his smile gone completely. You're crossing a line. Evan's voice shook for the first time. You crossed it first. I felt suddenly dizzy. Like the ground beneath me was tilting, slow and subtle, but unstoppable. What does he mean? I asked, louder than I meant to. My voice cracked, betraying me. Mark turned sharply. Lena, please. Please. Not denial. Not reassurance. Please. Evan closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again. 3 months ago, he said, Mark told you he was traveling for work. A conference in Denver. My chest tightened. I remembered that weekend. Remembered the hurried packing. The late-night call from a hotel room that looked unfamiliar. Remembered how tired he said he was. Yes, I said slowly. So? Mark laughed again, but there was panic now. Real panic. This is ridiculous. Evan kept going. He wasn't in Denver. The world narrowed. A ringing filled my ears. If this is some kind of test, Mark started. He was in Asheville, Evan said, cutting him off. With Rachel Moore. Someone gasped. Not loudly. Just a sharp intake of breath that sliced through the tension. Rachel Moore. The name didn't register at first. It floated, meaningless, like a stranger's face in a crowd. Who? I asked. Mark's head snapped toward Evan. Stop. Evan didn't. She's someone he's been seeing on and off for over a year. The words landed one by one, like stones dropped into water. Seeing. On and off. Over a year. My legs felt weak. I reached for the table without realizing it, fingers brushing the edge, grounding myself just enough to stay upright. That's not true, Mark said quickly. Too quickly. He's twisting things. I searched Mark's face for something familiar. Something solid. The man who proposed to me. The man who promised honesty. I didn't find him. I found someone calculating. When were you going to tell me? I asked. Mark exhaled sharply. There's nothing to tell. Evan let out a short, bitter laugh. You said that then, too. My head snapped toward him. Then. Evan hesitated. For the first time since standing up, he looked uncertain. Not about the truth. About the damage. You told me you ended it, Evan said, looking at Mark now. You told me you chose Lena. Mark's silence was deafening. I believed you, Evan continued. I wanted to believe you. The crowd shifted again. People glanced at each other, uncomfortable, unsure whether to stay or leave. Someone quietly started stacking plates. A normal action in a moment that felt anything but. My sister moved closer, her hand hovering near my back, not quite touching. Ready, but not intruding. Is this true? I asked Mark. Any of it? Mark looked at me like I was asking the wrong question. Why are you listening to him? He said. He's blowing things out of proportion. Out of proportion. Like betrayal could be measured. Like trust could stretch without tearing. Evan shook his head. You didn't end it, Mark. You just got better at hiding it. That sentence landed harder than the rest. Because suddenly, memories rearranged themselves. Late nights. Password changes. Calls taken in another room. The way he'd smile at his phone and then lock it when I walked in. Things I had dismissed as stress. Or privacy. Or my own insecurity. Why are you doing this? Mark snapped, his composure cracking. You think you're some kind of hero? Evan's voice dropped. No. I think I waited too long. The honesty in that admission made my throat burn. You knew? I asked Evan softly. For how long? Evan didn't answer immediately. Mark did. You see, he said quickly. He's making it sound worse than it is. Evan finally spoke. Long enough to hate myself for staying quiet. My breath caught. That wasn't an answer. But it was enough. I looked around at the faces surrounding us. Some shocked. Some sympathetic. Some already forming judgments. I wondered how many of them had known. How many had suspected. How many had chosen comfort over truth. My engagement ring felt heavier than before. Like it was pulling my hand down. Say something, I told Mark. Tell me the truth. He hesitated. Just a second. But that second was everything. Evan took another step forward. Lena, he said, this wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a one-time thing. My chest tightened painfully. Mark turned on him. Shut up. Evan didn't. It's not over, he said. It never was. The night seemed to hold its breath. I felt something inside me crack open. Not loudly. Quietly. Like a door unlocking. What else don't I know? I asked. Evan's jaw clenched. His eyes flicked to the table, then back to me. There's more, he said. And in the way he said it, I knew the worst hadn't even been spoken yet. There's more. Those two words didn't explode. They sank. They slid under my skin and settled somewhere deep, heavy and immovable, like something that had always been there and was only now making itself known. Have you ever had that moment where your body reacts before your mind does? Before you can argue. Before you can reason. My hands started shaking. Not violently. Just enough that I noticed. Just enough that I pressed them together to hide it. Mark noticed too. That's enough, he said, stepping fully between Evan and me now. You've said your piece. Sit down. But Evan didn't move. He looked past Mark again, directly at me, like Mark wasn't even there. Do you want me to stop? He asked. The question wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it split me in two. Because what he was really asking was this. Do you want comfort, or do you want the truth? I opened my mouth to answer. Mark beat me to it. She doesn't need this, he said. Not here. Not like this. Not here. Not like this. As if there were a better place to dismantle a life. I swallowed. My throat felt dry, tight, like it was resisting every word. I do, I said. Mark turned sharply. Lena. I want to hear it, I said again, louder this time. Firmer. All of it. Something flashed across Mark's face then. Not anger. Fear. Real fear. Evan nodded once. Like he'd been waiting for permission he never wanted to ask for. Okay, he said quietly. Then I'm going to tell you the part he never planned on you knowing. The yard felt suddenly too small. Too exposed. Every light too bright. Every face too close. I became painfully aware of how many people were watching me find out my life wasn't what I thought it was. Evan took a breath. After Denver, he said, after Asheville, after all the times he told you it was over, there was another trip. My stomach dropped. Mark shook his head. This is insane. Evan continued anyway. Last fall, he told you he was helping his brother move. I remembered that too. I remembered folding his clothes, making jokes about how sore he'd be, kissing him goodbye and telling him to drive safe. Yes, I said. He didn't go to his brother's, Evan said. He went to Charleston. My heart began to pound harder, louder. I could feel it in my ears. With her, Evan added. Rachel. I felt something cold spread through my chest. How do you know this? I asked. Evan hesitated, then reached into his pocket. Mark reacted instantly. No, he snapped. Don't you dare. Evan ignored him and pulled out his phone. I know, he said, because I picked him up. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Shock this time. Real shock. You what? Someone whispered. Evan's gaze didn't leave mine. He called me at 2 a.m. Said his car broke down. Asked me to drive 3 hours to get him. My vision blurred slightly. And when I got there, Evan continued. She was with him. Mark lunged forward then, grabbing Evan's arm. That's enough, he hissed. My sister stepped in immediately, pushing Mark back without hesitation. Don't touch him. Mark froze, surprised. Evan pulled his arm free. His voice shook now, but he didn't stop. They were arguing when I arrived, he said. About you. The sound that left my chest wasn't quite a gasp. It wasn't a sob either. It was something between the two, something broken and involuntary. What about me? I asked. Evan closed his eyes briefly. About how long he could keep lying to you. The word lying hung in the air, naked and undeniable. Mark laughed suddenly. A sharp, bitter sound. You're enjoying this, aren't you? Evan turned to him. I hate this. No hesitation. No dramatics. Just truth. I hate that I waited, Evan continued. I hate that I believed you when you said you'd handle it. And I hate that I'm doing this to her now. He looked back at me. But I couldn't watch you walk into a marriage built on this. My knees felt weak again. Marriage. The word felt foreign now. Ridiculous. Like something that belonged to another couple entirely. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I asked. Evan's shoulders sagged slightly. Because he made it sound temporary. Like a phase. Like something he was outgrowing. Mark scoffed. You make it sound like a crime. It is, Evan said. Just not the kind you get arrested for. That hit harder than any accusation. I looked at Mark again, really looked at him. The man who once told me he hated dishonesty. The man who just joked about honesty in front of everyone we loved. How long? I asked quietly. Mark didn't answer. How long? I repeated. Still nothing. Evan answered for him. Over a year, he said. The world tilted. Over a year meant before the proposal. Before the ring. Before every promise that followed. It meant the engagement itself was contaminated. A performance layered over a lie. I felt a strange clarity settle over me then. Pain, yes. Shock, absolutely. But also something sharp and undeniable. This wasn't an accident. This was a choice. Repeated. Calculated. Sustained. Is she here? Someone asked softly from the crowd. I hadn't even considered that possibility. Mark's head snapped up. No. Evan's silence spoke volumes. I turned to him slowly. Is she? She was invited, Evan said. She didn't come. That shouldn't have hurt more. But it did. Because it meant there was a version of this night where she might have been here too. Smiling. Watching. Knowing something I didn't. My hands curled into fists. And you thought proposing would fix this? I asked Mark. He finally met my eyes again. Really met them. I thought it would end it, he said. End it. Like love was a switch. Like betrayal could be outrun. Evan shook his head. You thought it would buy you time. Mark exploded then. You don't know everything. The sudden volume made people flinch. Evan stared at him. Then tell her. The challenge hung there, heavy and unmovable. Mark opened his mouth. Closed it. Then laughed again, shaking his head. This is insane. That laugh told me everything I needed to know. You're still lying, I said softly. Mark froze. Evan's voice dropped. There's one more thing. The crowd leaned in again despite themselves. I felt my heart drop before he even spoke. What? I asked. Evan swallowed hard. This wasn't the only time, he said. And in the way he said it, I knew the story Mark thought would stay buried was only just beginning to surface. This wasn't the only time. That sentence didn't just land. It echoed. It bounced off every laugh, every toast, every congratulatory hug from earlier that night and came back warped, ugly, unrecognizable. Like hearing your own voice played back to you and realizing it never sounded the way you thought it did. I stared at Evan, searching his face for hesitation. There wasn't any. Only resolve. And something else. Relief. As if saying it out loud had finally released him from a weight he'd been carrying alone. Mark shook his head slowly, like he was watching a bad performance. You're really going to do this, he said. You're really going to burn everything down. Burn everything down. As if truth were the fire, not the lie. I swallowed. My mouth felt dry, my tongue heavy. What do you mean, not the only time? Evan exhaled, long and controlled. I mean there were other trips. Other excuses. Other names. Names. Plural. My stomach twisted so sharply it felt like something inside me folded in on itself. Mark stepped forward again, his voice dropping into something dangerous. You don't have proof. Evan looked at him. Then slowly, deliberately, he reached into his pocket. The movement was small. Casual. Almost gentle. But the reaction it triggered was anything but. Mark stiffened. His eyes flicked to Evan's hand. Then to me. Then back to Evan. No, Mark said, too fast. Don't. Evan pulled out his phone. I heard someone near the table whisper, "Oh my God." The sound of it unlocking felt loud in the silence. A tiny click that cut through the air like a gunshot. I didn't want to do this, Evan said. I hoped it would never come to this. Mark laughed again, sharp and brittle. You're bluffing. Evan didn't answer. He turned the screen toward me. And just like that, the world narrowed to a rectangle of light in his hand. Text messages. Dates. Times. Photos. Not explicit. Not graphic. Just undeniable. Messages that didn't sound like work conversations. Messages that didn't sound like friendship. Messages that sounded intimate in a way I recognized immediately. Because I'd seen that tone before. From him. To me. My breath caught painfully in my chest. That's not, Mark started. Evan scrolled. A photo appeared. Mark in a mirror. A hotel room behind him I'd never seen. A caption beneath it that made my stomach drop. Miss you already. My knees buckled. My sister's arm wrapped around me instantly, steadying me before I even realized I was. That's fake, Mark said, his voice louder now. Desperate. You could have edited that. Evan tapped the screen again. Voice message. He pressed play. Mark's voice filled the yard. Soft. Low. Intimate. I hate lying to her, the recording said. But I don't know how to stop. A sound escaped my throat that didn't feel human. It felt like something tearing loose. The yard erupted. Gasps. Whispers. Someone said Mark's name like they were hoping he'd explain it away. Someone else muttered, "Oh my God." A chair scraped backward as someone stood abruptly. Mark lunged for the phone. My sister stepped in again, firm and unflinching. Don't. Evan pulled the phone back easily. I backed everything up. Mark's face drained of color. I barely recognized him anymore. The man in front of me looked smaller. Cornered. Stripped of charm and confidence and control. I felt something strange settle over me then. Not rage. Not hysteria. Clarity. How long? I asked again. My voice surprised me. It was steady now. Quiet. Dangerous in its calm. Mark opened his mouth. Closed it. Evan answered. Since before the proposal, he said. There it was. The confirmation I hadn't wanted but already knew. Before the ring. Before the speech. Before the promises. Everything I'd believed in had been layered on top of something rotten. You knew, I said to Mark. You knew when you asked me. He looked at me, eyes wild now. I loved you. Loved. Past tense. I almost laughed. You loved the version of me who didn't know, I said. The words came out without effort, like they'd been waiting. Mark's shoulders sagged slightly. I was going to end it. Evan scoffed. You said that every time. Mark turned on him. This is none of your business. Evan didn't flinch. It became my business when you made me lie for you. That stopped Mark. I turned back to Evan. You covered for him? Evan nodded slowly. Once. Then twice. Then too many times to count. The admission hurt in a different way. Not betrayal. Complicity. I looked around the table again. At the faces watching us unravel. How many people knew? I asked. No one answered. That was answer enough. I pulled my hand free from my sister's grip and looked down at the ring. The ring everyone had admired. The ring that symbolized a future that no longer existed. Slowly, deliberately, I slid it off. The tiny sound it made when it hit the table felt louder than the toast had. Mark stared at it like it was a weapon. You don't have to do this, he said, his voice breaking. Not like this. I met his gaze. Like what? I asked. Like the truth. Silence swallowed him. The music was still playing somewhere. Soft. Romantic. Absurd. I looked back at Evan. Why tonight? I asked. Why here? Evan hesitated. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. Because she almost showed up. My heart dropped into my stomach. She, I whispered. Evan nodded. And, because, he added quietly, there was something else you were about to say yes to, without knowing what it really meant. I stared at him, confusion cutting through the pain. What are you talking about? I asked. Evan opened his mouth to answer. And whatever he was about to reveal, I knew it would change everything all over again. Have you ever felt stupid in a room full of people who love you? Not because you did something wrong, but because everyone else seems to be standing on higher ground, looking down at a truth you're only just now seeing. Because that's what it felt like when Evan said, because she almost showed up. Almost. As if my humiliation had narrowly missed an extra witness. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. Showed up, here. Evan nodded once. She thought she was invited. The yard felt suddenly smaller. The air tighter. Like all the oxygen had been sucked out and replaced with judgment and pity. Mark snapped, that's not true. But his voice lacked conviction now. It didn't rise. It didn't push back. It hovered weakly in the space between us, already collapsing. I looked at Mark. Really looked at him. Did you invite her? I asked. He didn't answer right away. That hesitation told me everything. Evan spoke again. She thought this was a going-away kind of party. Closure. She didn't know he'd proposed yet. My stomach turned violently. She didn't know? I repeated. Evan shook his head. He told her you two were taking things slow. That marriage wasn't on the table yet. A sound escaped me before I could stop it. Not a cry. Not a scream. A laugh. Short. Broken. Disbelieving. I laughed because if I didn't, I would have fallen apart in front of everyone. And some part of me still wanted to stay upright. Still wanted to be in control of my own collapse. So, I said slowly, while he was asking me to marry him, he was telling her it wasn't serious. Mark finally exploded. This is not how it sounds, he shouted. You're twisting everything. I turned to him calmly. Too calmly. Then untwist it. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Around us, people shifted uncomfortably. I saw it clearly now. The looks that weren't shock, but recognition. The people who weren't confused, just guilty. My sister leaned in close and whispered, Lena. I pulled away gently. I needed to see this. I needed to understand how alone I'd been in a room full of people. How many of you knew? I asked, my voice carrying across the yard. No one answered. A few people looked down. Someone cleared their throat. Someone else took a sip of champagne like they suddenly needed something to do with their hands. That silence screamed louder than Evan ever could. You all came here, I continued, knowing this. Still nothing. I nodded slowly. That hurt almost as much as Mark's betrayal. Because betrayal from the person you love breaks your heart. But betrayal from the people who watched it happen? That fractures your sense of reality. Evan finally spoke again, his voice thick with regret. Not everyone knew everything, but enough of us knew something. Something. Enough to warn me. Enough to stop me. Enough to say anything. But they didn't. I looked back at Mark. You let me plan a future with you. I loved you, he said again, weaker this time. I shook my head. You loved the version of me who trusted you blindly. The music kept playing. A love song, slow and ridiculous, drifting through the wreckage of what was supposed to be a celebration. I felt a sudden surge of anger then. Not explosive. Focused. How long were you going to keep this going? I asked. After the wedding? After kids? How many milestones was I supposed to hit before you finally decided to be honest? Mark rubbed his face, pacing now. I didn't think it would get this far. I stared at him. You proposed. That was supposed to fix it, he snapped. Fix it. Like commitment could erase deceit. Evan stepped forward. You didn't propose because you loved her. You proposed because you were losing control. That landed. Mark froze. Evan continued, his voice steady, relentless. She was asking questions. You were slipping. And you thought a ring would lock everything down. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. The proposal hadn't been a promise. It had been a distraction. I looked down at the ring on the table again, catching the light like it was still trying to look beautiful. I was never your choice, I said softly. Mark looked at me, eyes glassy. That's not true. You chose convenience, I replied. And I was convenient. The words hurt to say. But they felt true. Evan swallowed hard. There's something else, he said. My chest tightened. Of course there was. There's always something else, I muttered. Evan hesitated. She didn't just almost show up. I looked up sharply. What do you mean? She called me, he said. An hour before the party. My breath caught. Why would she call you? Because she knew I was your friend too, Evan said quietly. And because she thought I deserved to know. My head spun. What did she say? I asked. Evan met my eyes, pain etched across his face. She said she was pregnant, he said. The world stopped. No sound. No movement. No breath. I heard my sister gasp beside me. Someone dropped a glass. It shattered somewhere near my feet, but I didn't look down. Pregnant. The word echoed in my head, bouncing off every memory I had of Mark and twisting them into something unrecognizable. That's not, Mark started, panic flooding his voice now. That's not true. Evan didn't argue. I don't know if it is. But she believes it is. My legs nearly gave out. You knew this, I said to Mark. You knew this before tonight? Mark's silence was the loudest thing in the world. I pressed my hand to my mouth, fighting the wave of nausea and disbelief crashing through me. You were going to marry me, I whispered, while someone else thought she was carrying your child. Mark broke then. I was going to figure it out, he said desperately. I didn't want to lose you. I stared at him, something inside me finally hardening. You already did, I said. The yard felt like a crime scene now. Evidence everywhere. Witnesses frozen in place. No one sure where to stand. I took a step back. Then another. I wasn't running. I was reclaiming space. I need air, I said, though what I really needed was distance. From him. From them. From the version of myself that had trusted so easily. Evan took a step toward me. Lena. I held up a hand. Not yet. Because I wasn't done processing. And because I had one more question burning through the chaos. I turned back to him. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I asked quietly. Why wait until tonight? Evan closed his eyes. When he opened them, his answer would explain everything. And I wasn't sure I was ready to hear it. Why didn't you tell me sooner? The question hung between us, heavier than anything else that had been said that night. Heavier than cheating. Heavier than the ring on the table. Heavier than the word pregnant still echoing in my head like a siren I couldn't shut off. Evan didn't answer right away. He looked down at the ground, then back up at me, like he was bracing himself for the consequences of honesty. Real honesty. The kind that doesn't just expose one person, but implicates everyone standing nearby. I thought he would stop, Evan said finally. The words hit me harder than I expected. Thought he would stop. Not hoped. Not believed. Thought. Like it was a calculation. A gamble he took with my life. You thought he'd stop lying? I asked. Evan nodded slowly. I thought he'd tell you himself. I thought if I stayed quiet long enough, it would force him to do the right thing. I let out a short, humorless laugh. So you waited. And in the meantime, I planned a wedding. Evan flinched. I know, he said. And I hate myself for that. I studied his face. The guilt there looked real. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Not the kind of guilt you perform for an audience. Mark scoffed behind us. Don't make yourself out to be some martyr. Evan turned to him sharply. I'm not. I failed her too. That surprised me. Failed her. Not helped you. Not betrayed her. Failed her. The acknowledgement cracked something open inside me. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But understanding. You stayed silent, I said to Evan, because it was easier than detonating everything. Yes, he admitted. And because I was scared. Of what? I asked. Evan hesitated. Then said it. Of losing you both. That stopped me. You? I asked. You were afraid of losing me? Evan nodded. You were important to me. As a person. As someone who didn't deserve this. I swallowed hard. And Mark? I asked. Evan's jaw tightened. Mark was my best friend. Or at least, I thought he was. The yard was quiet again. Not shocked quiet this time. Heavy quiet. The kind that comes after damage has already been done. Mark stepped forward, frustration boiling over. So this is what this is about? Your conscience. Evan met his gaze without hesitation. No. This is about the lie you built on top of another lie. Mark laughed bitterly. You act like you know everything. Evan didn't raise his voice. I know enough. I looked at Mark. Is there anything else? The question slipped out before I could stop it. Anything else? Because somehow, part of me already knew the answer. Mark's eyes darted to Evan. Then to the crowd. Then back to me. No, he said too quickly. Evan exhaled slowly. That's not true. Mark spun on him. Shut up. Evan didn't. There was a contract, Evan said. The word felt out of place. Cold. Businesslike. A what? I asked. Mark's face went pale. A lease. Evan corrected himself. In her name. That Mark co-signed. My heart dropped. For what? I asked. For an apartment, Evan said. In Charleston. The realization hit like a physical blow. Not a fling. Not a phase. Infrastructure. You were building a second life, I whispered. Mark shook his head violently. It wasn't like that. Evan looked at him with something like pity. It was exactly like that. I felt dizzy again, but this time it wasn't shock. It was clarity stacking on clarity, each new truth slotting into place with sickening precision. You plan to marry me, I said slowly, while legally tying yourself to someone else. Mark rubbed his face with both hands. I was trying to manage a situation. Manage. I almost laughed again. That's what you call this? I asked. Management. He looked at me, eyes wet now. I didn't want to lose you. I shook my head. You didn't want to lose control. That was it. That was the core of it. Control over the narrative. Control over people. Control over consequences. Evan spoke quietly. That's why I couldn't wait anymore. I turned to him. What changed? Evan hesitated. Then said something that made my chest tighten. He asked me to lie again, Evan said. Tonight. The crowd stirred. What do you mean? I asked. Earlier, Evan explained. Before the party. He asked me to cover for him if she showed up. To tell you she was a coworker. Or an old friend. My stomach lurched. You planned for her to be here, I said to Mark. He didn't answer. Evan continued. And then he said something else. My pulse spiked. What? I asked. Evan looked at me carefully. He said if you ever found out, you'd forgive him. A chill crept up my spine. And why did he think that? I asked. Evan swallowed. Because he said you loved him too much to leave. The words cut deep. Not because they were cruel. Because they were calculated. I felt something inside me harden permanently. I stepped forward, meeting Mark's eyes. You never saw me, I said. You saw a safety net. Mark reached for me instinctively. I stepped back. Don't, I said. The distance between us felt necessary now. Protective. I didn't tell you sooner, Evan said quietly, because I kept hoping he'd choose you the right way. I nodded slowly. And tonight? Tonight, Evan said. He crossed a line I couldn't ignore. What line? I asked. Evan looked at Mark. Then back at me. He asked me to be his best man, Evan said, while knowing she was pregnant. The crowd reacted audibly this time. Gasps. Whispers. Shock rolling through the yard like thunder. I closed my eyes. That was it. The final layer. The lie beneath the lie beneath the lie. You were going to stand next to him, I said to Evan, and smile. Evan shook his head. I couldn't. I opened my eyes and looked at Mark one last time. I don't know who you thought I was, I said. But I'm not her. He broke down then. Tears spilling, hands shaking, voice cracking. Please. We can fix this. Fix. The word meant nothing now. I turned away. The party was over. The relationship was over. But something else was just beginning. As I walked toward the gate, Evan called after me. Lena, he said. There's one more thing you should know. I stopped. Didn't turn around. Because some part of me already knew that whatever came next would change what I did after tonight. There's a moment, right before you turn around, where you decide who you're going to be next. I felt it standing there with my hand still on the gate. The metal was cool under my fingers. Solid. Real. Everything the night suddenly wasn't. I could walk away. Leave the questions unanswered. Protect myself from whatever Evan was about to say. But I didn't. Because some truths follow you if you don't face them. I turned back. Evan stood a few steps away, hands at his sides, shoulders slumped now like the adrenaline had finally drained out of him. Mark was behind him, still crying, still saying my name under his breath like repetition might undo what had already been done. What? I asked. Just one word. Sharp. Controlled. Evan took a breath. The reason I couldn't wait, he said, is because tonight wasn't just an engagement party. I frowned. What do you mean? He glanced briefly at Mark, then back at me. He was going to ask you for something. My stomach tightened again. Ask me what? Evan's voice dropped. To move up the wedding. The words didn't register right away. Move it up. I repeated. Yes, Evan said. To the end of summer. I shook my head slowly. That doesn't make sense. We hadn't even picked a date. That was the plan, Evan said. To announce it tonight. After the toasts. After everyone was already celebrating. I felt dizzy. Mark looked up sharply. That's not. Evan cut him off. You told me you needed to lock it down. Your words. Lock it down. Like a deal. Like a problem. He said if he married you quickly, Evan continued, everything else would become complicated enough to buy time. Buy time. For what? For her, Evan said softly. And for the baby. The world narrowed again. You were going to rush me into a marriage, I said to Mark, to protect yourself. Mark scrambled to his feet. I was trying to protect us. I laughed then. Really laughed. Not hysterically. Not dramatically. Just empty. There is no us, I said. The guests were barely pretending to listen now. Some had already drifted away, quietly slipping out of the yard like witnesses leaving a crime scene. Others stayed frozen, caught between horror and morbid curiosity. I didn't care anymore. Evan took another step closer, careful now, like someone approaching a wounded animal. He told me he was afraid she'd go public, he said. That she'd contact you. That everything would unravel. And you believed him? I asked. Evan shook his head. I believed you deserved to know before he trapped you. That word hit me harder than anything else. Trapped. Marriage as a cage. I felt suddenly grateful. Grateful that the truth had arrived when it did, no matter how brutal. Grateful that whatever instincts I'd ignored had finally been validated. When did you decide to speak up? I asked. Evan didn't hesitate this time. When she sent me a photo. My chest tightened. What kind of photo? An ultrasound, he said. A collective gasp rippled through the remaining crowd. I closed my eyes. There it was. The final confirmation that this wasn't rumor or manipulation or exaggeration. It was real. She asked me, Evan continued, his voice breaking slightly, if you knew. I opened my eyes slowly. And you told her? I told her no, Evan said. And that I was sorry. Sorry. The word felt inadequate, but I understood the weight behind it. That's when I knew, Evan said, that silence would make me just as guilty. I nodded. Slowly. Deliberately. Mark stumbled toward me again, tears streaking his face, hands outstretched. Lena, please. I'll fix it. I'll take responsibility. We can still. I raised a hand. No, I said. Calm. Final. You don't get to plan my forgiveness. He froze. You made decisions, I continued, assuming I would stay. That I would bend. That I would accept whatever version of the truth you handed me. I shook my head. That ends tonight. Mark collapsed back into his chair, defeated. I turned to Evan. Thank you, I said. His eyes widened slightly. You don't have to. I know, I said. But I'm saying it anyway. Not because what he did was perfect. Not because waiting had been right. But because he stood up when it finally mattered. I don't know what happens next, I said, mostly to myself. But I know what doesn't. I looked around one last time. At the string lights. The empty glasses. The ring still sitting on the table like a relic from a life that almost was. This night doesn't get to define me, I said. But it will remind me. I walked to the gate again. This time, I didn't stop. Behind me, someone called my name. I didn't turn around. Not because I was angry, but because I was done. That was the moment I stopped being his fiancé and became something else entirely. People ask me what happened after. They ask it softly, like they're afraid the answer might bruise them too. Did I scream? Did I cry? Did I throw something? Did I regret walking away? The truth is, the loudest part was already over. The explosion everyone imagines, the confrontation, the exposure, the public unraveling, that was just the surface. What came after was quieter, heavier, and far more permanent. That night, I didn't go home with Mark. I went home with my sister. I sat on her couch with my shoes still on, staring at a wall that didn't know me, didn't judge me, didn't ask anything of me. My phone buzzed nonstop. Messages. Missed calls. Apologies layered on top of excuses layered on top of panic. I didn't answer any of them. Because here's something no one tells you about betrayal. By the time the truth comes out, your body has already made its decision. Mine had. I slept for maybe an hour that night. Not because I was crying. I'd run out of tears earlier, but because my mind wouldn't stop replaying one sentence. Honesty is everything to me. The irony of it burned. But not in the way you'd expect. It burned because it was true. Honesty is everything. And that was exactly why the lie couldn't survive. The days that followed were strange. Surreal. People reached out in waves. Some with genuine concern. Some with curiosity disguised as sympathy. A few with apologies that came far too late. The ones that hurt most weren't from Mark. They were from people who said, I didn't know how to tell you. Because what they were really saying was, I chose comfort over courage. I ended the engagement quietly. No dramatic announcement. No social media post. Just a returned ring and a sentence that felt heavier than any vow I'd almost taken. This is over. Mark tried everything. Tears. Promises. Therapy suggestions. Long messages that started with accountability and ended with self-pity. He told me he was scared. That he was confused. That he loved me in his own way. But here's the thing I learned the hard way. Love that requires you to stay ignorant isn't love. It's control. And once you see that clearly, you can't unsee it. Evan checked in once. Carefully. Respectfully. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't ask for praise. He asked if I was okay. I told him the truth. I said I will be. Eventually. Because healing doesn't rush just because the truth arrives fast. Some days were easier than others. Some days I felt empowered. Clear. Certain. Other days, I missed the man I thought I was going to marry. I missed the version of my life that existed before the lie cracked open. And that's the part people don't talk about enough. You don't just grieve the person. You grieve the future. The house you pictured. The traditions you imagined. The quiet moments you believed were waiting for you. Letting go of that takes time. But here's what surprised me. As the weeks passed, something else grew in the space where that future had been. Relief. Not the dramatic kind. Not the triumphant kind. The quiet, steady kind. The kind that shows up when you realize you don't have to question your reality anymore. When you don't have to second-guess your instincts. When you don't have to decode jokes or excuses or half-truths. I started sleeping again. I started laughing real laughter, not the polite kind. I started trusting myself. And that, more than anything, was what Mark never expected. He thought I loved him too much to leave. What he didn't understand was that I loved myself enough to stay gone. Months later, someone at a dinner party raised a glass and made a joke about honesty. Everyone laughed. It was harmless, unloaded, clean. And for the first time, it didn't sting. Because I finally understood something that night at my engagement party had been trying to teach me. Pay attention to what people joke about. Pay attention to what makes them uncomfortable. Pay attention to who shifts in their chair when certain words are spoken. Truth doesn't always announce itself with drama. Sometimes it stands up quietly during a toast. Sometimes it clears its throat. Sometimes it waits, hoping you'll notice before it has to shout. If you're listening to this and something in your chest feels tight, let me say this directly to you. If a joke makes the room go still, don't ignore it. If someone deflects when honesty comes up, don't rationalize it. If your instincts whisper that something isn't right, don't silence them for the sake of peace. Peace built on lies is just delayed chaos. And the longer you wait, the more it costs. I didn't lose a fiancé that night. I lost an illusion. And in return, I got my clarity back. My agency back. My future, the real one, back. So if you've ever wondered whether you'd want to know the truth if it meant losing everything you thought you had, let me answer that for you. Yes. Because what you lose was never really yours. And what you gain, that changes everything. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you of a moment you ignored or a feeling you couldn't explain, share it. Comment. Tell your story. You're not alone in this more than you think. And if you want more real stories about trust, betrayal, and the quiet strength it takes to walk away, subscribe. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do